Lasedi Motlanci's murder was one of those pivotal moments that seemed destined to change the course of a country's trajectory. There are some events, a law passed, a speech delivered, a transgression exposed, which are deemed significant only in retrospect. Like looking back on a life and realising the point at which things had taken a turn for the better or the worse. This was different. As news of the murder spread across South Africa, its people knew there could be no going back to business as usual. Lasedi Motlanchi was more than a man. He was an idea, a symbol, and with his death, that idea had been tarnished. Lasedi had been one of freedom's children. Born in the 80s, his life mirrored the changes in South Africa as apartheid's pernicious laws were expunged from the statutes. A quick and confident boy, he'd once been interviewed by a TV crew doing a piece on the role schools were playing in changing attitudes to race. The reporter had asked the class of teenagers to define racism. In a flash, Lasedi had stuck up his hand. He'd pointed to one of only 3 white children in the class and said, well, racism is like, if I'm unkind to Darren and call him names, Whitey and so on. The clip had made it onto the evening news. This reversal of the conventional definition of racism, that white people could be victims, from the lips of a black child seemed to speak volumes for the miraculous journey South Africa was making. From that day on, Lasedi had become something of a celebrity, not so much teacher's pet as the nation's pet. His words were spliced into countless promotional videos produced by the government. He'd be dragged out of the classroom to meet visiting dignitaries from China or Europe. A local TV station had adopted him for its Children of the Future series, which meant he featured in an annual film tracing his every success, of which there were many, and failure, of which there were none. His progress in school, his 3 years at the University of Cape Town, all of it was chronicled. In short, Lasedi had become a national mascot, the embodiment of South Africa's new beginning. And now he was dead. Even in a country inured to violent crime and a murder rate that saw it perpetually leading the wrong kind of international league table, the notion that Lasedi Motlanchi would one day become a victim, another notch on the grim statistics board, was unthinkable. There wasn't a person in the country, whether they spent their time in a township shebeen or in a gated mansion, who did not know who Lasedi Motlanchi was and what he represented. So who, in their right mind, would want him dead? So these are the thoughts of one of the characters caught up in the conflict over land in South Africa, and he's thinking about gentler times. He remembered the time when he'd helped to organise an end-of-harvest braai, South Africa's version of a barbecue, on a farm right on the border with Mozambique. It was the first year of a profit-sharing scheme that Kagiso had helped put together. The area had been blessed with good rains and a bountiful crop. That evening, as a blood-orange sky had turned purple, as shadows grew longer and fainter till they just seeped away into the soil, one of the migrant workers had brought out his mbira, a traditional handheld musical instrument, a finger piano, as some called it. Kagiso had sat on the edge of the group, entranced by this vision of a different future. The farmer and his wife, Afrikaners both, sat near the fire. On the other side of the circle, their children huddled next to the housemaid and some of the workers' children. An old man, rheumy eyes staring into the embers, pulled at a Zol, a homemade cigarette, spliced with the comforting fragrance of dagga. Women spread polyester blankets over their bare legs, and young men shared the last few bottles of beer. Callous thumbs plucked at the metal tines of the mbira, shaped like the flat handles of tablespoons, and picked out a tune that had been written in another century in the great language of the coast, Swahili. Nobody understood the words, but all were moved by the ballad, the lament of a young suitor who knows he will not wed his angel, his Malaika, for want of a good fortune. Kagiso had looked across at the farmer and was sure he'd seen the man's eyes well up with a tenderness so far removed from the caricature of his people. The morning, he knew, would expose again the starkness of his country's struggle to find a middle ground between great wealth and great poverty. But for that evening, under that deep and star-studded African sky, Kahiso let himself dream, yes, dream. Dream of another country, one in which hope triumphed over despair and idealism scored a victory over cynicism.